to kick off the recording. Looks like it's started. And yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So first I'll introduce myself. My name is Jeffrey Vasquez. I'm an Azure technical specialist in the West region. Steve's counterpart in the West, Steve services the East. We help with anything technical when it comes to Azure. If you need any kind of overview or any knowledge transfer on anything Azure related, we can help you out. Things like proof of concepts and demos, we can help out there as well. But today we're going to focus on Azure IaaS fundamentals. We're going to show you how easy it is and how fast it is to set up infrastructure resources in Azure. Now, what's important to keep in mind throughout this demo, that it's critical that when you plan and build your infrastructure, that you really have a good plan around like the networking, the storage, and all of that before you start building your virtual machines. And then you'll see that here in a few minutes. So before we dive into the Azure Portal, I'm going to go ahead and share a diagram and show you what we'll be building today. So if you take a look at the Visio diagram there, Steve, can you confirm that the diagram is showing on the screen?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, awesome. So you can see here, we're going to be standing up a web server, a public-facing IaaS web server, which you can access from any browser. And we're going to have that here built in the next 30 minutes. Now, the infrastructure that's required for that, you can see here in this diagram, going from the outside in. We're going to start with building a resource group. That's that outermost square there. It's used to separate things like virtual machine workloads, network components, storage accounts, and other such items. This makes it really easy to go directly to a desired area or workload to find or manage components within it. So to give you an example, let's say you're standing up at ADFS in Azure, and you want to have all your virtual machines, your networking, your storage accounts all together so you can manage everything for ADFS. You can put all of those resources within a resource group. So it's basically a logical container, very similar to like an organizational unit or an OU in Active Directory. And then from there, we'll go ahead and build our Azure Virtual Network, or a VNet for short. And basically, a VNet is your network up in the cloud. It'll use private IP addressing. We're going to carve up that virtual network and create subnets so that we can have a DMZ subnet where our web server will reside, or any resources that are going to be public-facing we would put on that subnet. We're also going to create network security groups, aka firewalls, which get assigned to individual subnets to allow and block certain traffic from getting to those subnets. So we'll be covering quite a bit, but again, it's really fast and easy to set these things up. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and switch my screen over to the Azure Portal. Go ahead and move my window. Okay, so in a second here, if someone can let me know that they can see my screen, that would be great.
It's loading right now.
Okay.
There you go. I can see it. I think you're good.
Perfect. Thanks, Steve. All right, so the first thing we're going to want to do is build our resource group. So to build or to create anything in Azure, typically start with the Marketplace. And to access the Azure Marketplace, you're going to want to click on this plus button here. Now, you can find any resources you need for Azure within the Marketplace. So if you want to create maybe a load balancer, right, or a virtual machine, you can find all of those things here in the Marketplace. So here in this search box for the Marketplace, we'll type in resource group and hit enter. And here you can see a bunch of different resources show up. We'll select resource group. And anytime you select anything in the Marketplace, there's always a little description here at the top. It gives you a little info about that resource. So we'll go ahead and click Create. Now, what's really important is when you start building things in Azure, you want to make sure that you have a proper naming convention. Want to do that to make sure that you start things off right, that you can identify your resources properly. I mean, you treat this just like your own data center that you have on-prem. So it's very difficult to change the name of resources at a later time. So make sure that you have like a proper naming convention for all your resources before you get started. And a typical naming convention that we follow in Azure is we'll start with the resource type. So here it's a resource group. So we'll do RG dash and then its location. So we're going to be selecting the Iowa data center region. So we'll type in Iowa and then dash the workload. So the workload here is, I mean, this is pretty much a demo, right? We're doing a demo environment. So we'll go ahead and just call it demo. So here, resource group dash Iowa dash demo. Then you select your subscription. And then here, this is also very important. You get to select which data center region you want your resource created in. So because I'm in Azure Government, you can see here that we have DoD Central, DoD East for our Department of Defense customers. And then we also have US Gov Iowa and US Gov Virginia. These bottom two are typically used by our state and local government customers. So we'll go ahead and click Iowa. I'm on the West Coast, so we'll go ahead and choose the one closest to me. And then we'll click Create. And boom, just like that, our resource group is created. So after our resource group, we're going to want to create the virtual network. Just because anytime you stand up any kind of virtual machine, you'll need a network to connect it to. And if you think about building your own data center, right, typically before you have your servers installed and configured, you have your networking set up and in place. So you treat this the same way, but it's just done up in the cloud. So again, to create our virtual network, we'll go ahead and click plus here. Type in virtual network in the marketplace. There it is, virtual network, along with a bunch of other networking objects that you can select. Now, since we're already on the screen, I do want to show you that even our partners and our third-party partners that we work with have items here in the Azure Marketplace. So if you're looking to set up like a Barracuda email security gateway in the Azure Marketplace, you can do that. You just select the item here. You can see they even have BYOL options, so you can bring your own license. So it's kind of nice that you can get Barracuda, F5, and all sorts of our partners' products in Azure. But let's go ahead and select Virtual Network. One thing to also take note of is when you're creating resources and you see a deployment model to select, we always recommend now that customers select Resource Manager. That's the current portal that we're managing resources with. The classic portal is the older way, which is still fully supported, but everything moving forward is going to be leveraging our Resource Manager technology. So we'll click Create for our virtual network. Okay, so let's name our VNet here. So following our naming convention, we'll do VNet-Iowa. Now here you can select your address space by specifying the /CIDR. So here we'll go ahead and do a Class C address space here for 256 addresses. If you wanted to, you can change it. Like we change that to 25, you'd get 128 addresses. But we'll change this to 24. And then we can name our initial subnet. So like I said earlier, we're going to carve this virtual network up into subnets. So let's go ahead and name this initial subnet. We'll go ahead and make this our DMZ one, where our web server is going to be stood up. So VNet-Iowa-subnet-DMZ. So we know that it's our DMZ subnet. And within this subnet, we're going to want 16 addresses. So let's change that to /28. This is 16 addresses within that virtual network. You choose your subscription, and then here for resource group, you're going to want to select the resource group we created for this demo. So you can create a new one if you want, but if you select Use Existing, select, RG Iowa demo. It's one we created earlier. And then for our data center region, we'll stick with Iowa. And you click create. If you click on this bell up here for notifications, you can keep track of your deployment, see your resources getting created. So we'll give that a sec to finish. There's our virtual network. So let's take a look at the virtual network since that's been created. So if you go over to virtual networks, by the way, let me show you this pane before I continue. If you look here, you can see all the different resources that that you've created. This is customizable, so you can add other areas here if you want to. But if we go to virtual networks here, you can see all the virtual networks I've created here in the past. The one I created just now is right here, VNet Iowa. So let's select that. And you can see here within your virtual network all sorts of settings here, kind of an overview of this virtual network. The address space, its location, right? This one's in Iowa, the subscription. You can see if there are any connected devices, any connected VMs. They would be listed here. But we haven't created any VMs yet, so it's blank. There's an activity log, and this applies to all resources in Azure if you're using the resource manager model. You can see any kind of activity that took place with this specific resource. We have access control. So this is new in the resource manager model, which is great. It's basically RBAC or role-based access control. So you can set permissions to individual resources within Azure. And then tags. So for those that maybe want to do chargeback, you can tag individual resources so you can keep track. Let's say you have a set of virtual machines that are for your accounting department. You could tag them as department accounting. That way, when you do your billing, you can see how much that specific department utilized in Azure resources and bill them back for that amount. So another pretty cool feature we have in Azure. All right, so taking a look at the virtual network, you can see there's the IP address range that we created. Let's hop over to subnets. We have that DMZ subnet with a /28 range for 16 addresses. We're going to want to create another subnet for our back-end application servers, since those will not be public-facing. So I clicked plus to add the subnet. Now let's name this VNet Iowa subnet backend. So maybe app servers or DB servers like SQL would go into this subnet. We'll cover network security groups here in a bit. We're not going to cover route table today. But let's click OK. Wait for that subnet to be created. And there it is. So now we have two subnets within that virtual network, which we'll be using for our demo. Okay, so now let's jump over to network security groups. So basically, network security groups is a fancy way of saying firewall. It's essentially a firewall that we use in Azure. So to create our network security group, let's go back to our marketplace. And by the way, if anyone does come up with any questions, feel free to type them in the IM window, or you can come off mute and ask away. Okay, so there's our network security group. We'll click create. Now these network security groups or NSGs are going to be set for each subnet, so we can limit or control the traffic to each of those subnets. So let's go ahead and name our first network security group here. Let's call this NSG-Iowa-subnet-DMZ. So this firewall or NSG is going to be set for our DMZ subnet. Let's go ahead and put it in our resource group that we created for the demo. And we'll put it in our Iowa data center region. Click create. And while that's going, that will take a second. Let's go ahead and create another one for the backend subnet as well. All right, NSG, Iowa, subnet, backend. Okay, so we saw that the DMZ NSG has already been created. So let's go to that network security group. So we'll go to more services here. So if you need to get to any of your resources and they're not listed here, you just click on more services over there. Type in network security groups. There it is. Actually, let's add it as a favorite here. There, now it's listed. Okay, so the NSG we created is right here for the DMZ. Now, if you click on that, you'll see that there aren't any rules set. So right now, all traffic is, from the outside is being blocked to those subnets. So to go ahead and allow traffic, we're going to have to create some rules, right? Since we're building a web server, we're going to want to allow HTTP traffic. And we're going to also want to allow RDP traffic so that we can RDP to our web server that will be on that subnet. So to do that, we'll click Inbound Security Rules. Click Add. Let's allow HTTP. We'll name this HTTP-allow. You can prioritize your rules here. So here, by default, this is set to 100. You can set the source. So this is a pretty cool feature. We're going to be allowing any traffic to come in from outside to the subnet through port 80. But if you wanted to, you could limit it to an individual IP or an IP address range. So if you only wanted to allow traffic from a certain IP or range, you could input that information here. Or you can specify it by tag. So if you only wanted to allow traffic from a certain Azure resource that has a very specific tag, you can do that as well. But we'll be selecting any. And also, if you don't know the port number of the service that you're trying to allow or block traffic from, you can just select the service here. So here, HTTP, and it auto-populates the port range for you, as well as the protocol. So we'll be allowing HTTP traffic, allow, we'll click OK. And that's going to go ahead and create that rule. Let that finish. Then we'll add RDP, so we can RDP to the server. So add, let's do RDP allow. We got priority of 110, since 100 was our priority for HTTP. We always recommend having a gap between your rules when it comes to priority, just in case you need to add rules in between when prioritizing them. So we'll allow RDP traffic. Service, select RDP. There's the port. Allow. Click OK. So there, now we have our network security group or our firewall set up with the right rules. That will take a sec. There's our RDP. So we're in good shape there. OK. So let me share the, actually, I want to share the diagram again just to show you what we've built. Before we stand up our virtual machines, just to paint a picture for everyone. All right, so we built from the outside going in here, we built our resource group. We've built our virtual network, which is the dotted line there. We've carved that up into two different subnets, which you see here, these two subnets. And we've assigned network security groups or firewalls to those subnets to allow certain types of traffic to get through. Now what we're going to do is stand up our web server VM. So where do we go? None other than the Azure Marketplace for our virtual machine. All right, so one thing to take note of here is you're going to want to type in the image type that you're looking for. So we're going to be building an IaaS web server, so we're going to want Windows Server. So you type in Windows Server 2016. Then you'll see all the various VM images that are available in the Azure Marketplace. So we're going to do 2016 data center. You'll see also there's an HUB in front of some of these images. HUB stands for Hybrid Use Benefit. So this would allow you to use like server licensing that you have as a part of an enterprise agreement. That way it'll lower the cost of the VM for you if you're going to be using that. Otherwise, if you select one of these standard Windows Server images, then the cost of licensing, the cost of the OS is baked into the cost of the VM. We get asked that a lot. So thought I'd share. Okay, there's our image. Let's click Create. Following our naming convention, let's name this region. And its role, so this will be a web server. And then its instance, so Web 01. So when it's Iowa Web 01. You can select between premium storage or standard storage. Premium storage typically is used for resource-intensive applications such as SQL, the ones that need like high IOPS and high disk throughput. But for the demo, we'll select just standard HDD. For a username and password, this will be your local admin. So you'll want to make sure that you put in a familiar local administrator name. I'll just select this because I'm a Game of Thrones fan. However, that's not a best practice, so please don't use Tyrion as your local admin username. All right, let's type in a password. Also, there's password complexity built into this, so you're going to want a complex password for your local admin. Let's place this VM in our resource group, RG Iowa Demo. We created that earlier. We have our data center region. Click OK. So here's where you get to select your virtual machine size. A couple recommended sizes show up here, but if you want to see all the ones available for that data center region, you click on View All, and you can see a whole list of VM sizes that you can select from for your virtual machine. And lots of great information here for your VM, number of cores, the memory. You'll want to take note of if you need a certain amount of data drives, it's listed here. It also shows the max number of IOPS and the local SSD that it's capable of if you need premium storage. There's also a pricing estimate on the bottom. So this is an estimate of how much it will cost for that VM to run 24/7 for a month. Of course, if you turn off your VM at night or on the weekends or at certain times, then that price will go down. For the sake of this demo, we'll select an A2, since we don't need something that's heavy duty. So right here. By the way, A-series VMs tend to be used for like test dev scenarios or servers that aren't very resource intensive, so maybe like a domain controller. But for most production workloads, we recommend at least a D-series. Those have better processors than our A-series VMs. So we'll select A2, click Select. And here are various settings that we need to set for our VM. You can create a storage account. We typically recommend having a storage account per VM, just because if you have one storage account that you use for multiple VMs, that storage account becomes a single point of failure. So if you lose that storage account, it'll affect all those VMs that are connecting to it. We do have a new form of storage out. It's called Managed Disks. It's not available yet in Azure Government, but it is in Azure Commercial. And it's slated to be available in Azure Government soon. But it makes it so much simpler to add disks to your VMs using managed disks. You don't have to create a storage account or a page blob. You just have a disk that you manage, and it has built-in DR with technology called storage scale units that stripes your data across multiple pieces of hardware in the event of a hardware failure. So managed disks, highly recommended when it becomes available in Azure Government. But here, we'll just go ahead and let them create a new storage account for this VM. So create new, call this Iowa VM disk 01. And you can select if you want it to be locally redundant, which means there's 3 copies of your data stored within the same data center region. If you choose geo-redundant, then it's 3 additional copies on top of the 3 first copies will be replicated to another data center a couple hundred miles away. So it'll go to Virginia. But we'll select LRS for this demo. So there's our storage account. We want this VM to be on the virtual network we created for this demo, which was VNet Iowa. So it's already pre-selected there. So we'll keep that one as is. Now the subnet. This web server is going to be public facing, so we want it on our DMZ. So let's go ahead and select DMZ. We'll let them create a new public IP address so that we can get to the server via remote desktop protocol using its public IP. You can set a network security group at the VM level if you want to for added security, but we already have an NSG set up for our subnet, so we're going to go ahead and say none for this NSG for this individual VM. If you use like Chef or Puppet for desired state configuration, we have extensions for items like that here. You can add extensions to your VMs. And then if this was part of an availability set, or maybe like a web server farm, where we had multiple web servers for an application, you can add this as part of an availability set, add this VM. So you would just create new here, and you could create an availability set, so we'd have maybe 2 or 3 web servers, and they would be put on different hardware just to make sure that if we lose one piece of hardware, it's not affecting all the VMs on that availability set. But we'll go ahead and just say none for now, since we're just building a quick web server here. Boot diagnostics. Typically, we have that enabled so we can troubleshoot any boot issues. There's a storage account where those diagnostic files are saved down here. Then you can also enable guest OS diagnostics. And you would say OK. And you can see here all the different settings that we selected during the creation of this VM are listed here. And once you verify that everything looks good, you click OK. And it goes through the process of creating your virtual machine. Now, this does take anywhere between 5 to 10 minutes. So for the sake of time, I've already created a replica of this virtual machine. So we'll go ahead and jump over to that VM so we don't have to wait while that VM is getting created. So let's go ahead and pretend this demo web 01 is the VM that we just created. So you can see here all the different settings for the virtual machine. I'm not going to go ahead and I'm not going to cover all of them, but again, the overview, you can see the size of the VM, how many cores, how much memory, what region it's in. You can see disks here. If you wanted to add additional data drives, you would do that here. If we're a part of an availability set, it would be listed here under availability set. If you wanted to change the size of your VM, let's say you needed, like a D series because you need, more processing power and higher memory, you could change the VM size within that blade. So you'd select, the VM size here and click select. It does require a reboot of that VM to change the size, but you can change the size of a VM. You're not stuck to a certain VM size. So we'll go ahead and go back to our virtual machine here. Okay, so the virtual machine has been created. Now to access our VM, we're going to want to RDP to that box. So to do that, you click Connect there. So there's that Connect button under Overview. An RDP window will open. And type in your local administrator credentials. See, it's using that public IP here. Oh, I typed that in correctly. There we go. And then boom, we're logged into our server up in Azure. So here's our web server that we created. This is attached to that virtual network we created earlier. It's on that DMZ subnet. So the only traffic that can get to it is HTTP and RDP. That's all set up. It's like any normal Windows server you'd have on-prem, but running in the cloud. You can go ahead and open a command prompt here, type in an ipconfig. You can see it has its private IP addressing. It has access to the internet. Yeah, and if we go back to Server Manager here, I went ahead and pre-installed IaaS. I basically just went through the IaaS installation by clicking next, 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 finish, and this became a full-blown web server, just like that. So that just took like a few minutes to set up as well. So with our web server all set up, let's make sure that we can browse to it. So let's take note of this public IP here, the 13.72.183.7. The 13.72.183.7. We're going to try and browse to it from a browser just to make sure that the HTTP traffic is going through to that server. And there it is. This is a typical splash page, but it does show that we are able to get through when we browse to that public IP to this public-facing IaaS web server. Now, just for fun, let's go ahead and make sure that that NSG is working properly. Let's see if that VM is still running. So let's go to the network security group that we created for this VM here. Let's go to services here, network security groups. Okay, so when we created demo web 01 NSG, so you can see here it's allowing port 80 and port 3389 for RDP. Now let's remove the HTTP rule. I'll wait for that to finish. Usually just takes maybe 5 to 10 seconds. And while that's deleting, any questions so far? Okay. Cool. So no questions. Let's continue. All right. So we deleted the HTTP rule. Let's try browsing to that same public IP. So I'll go ahead and open a new in-private browsing session here, just to make sure I don't have any cached information in my browser. Let's type in that public IP. So 13.72.183.7. And it's waiting. And nothing's happening. And it's broken. Well, not broken. It's blocked. It's blocked, which is a good sign. It means our network security group is working, which is fabulous. But let's make sure that we can turn it back on. Let's go back to the portal. Let's re-add that rule. So we go to our network security group. We go to inbound security rules. Click add. HTTP-allow. Allow it from anywhere. Select HTTP. Click OK. Let's wait for that rule to finish. Okay, the rule's updated. Sometimes it takes a minute or two to sync. So we'll So remember, we couldn't get to this public IP by browsing to it, but since we added the rule, let's see if this works. Nope, still not there. Let's try it again. Yeah, sometimes it takes a couple seconds before the settings kick in. Let's try it again here. Let's see if the demo gods are with me today. Oh, there it is. It worked. So it kind of shows that the power of the network security groups, the traffic that you can allow, you can deny. I mean, it works like a standard firewall, and it's set at that subnet level, right? So if you wanted to create a DMZ, for your public-facing applications, then you can carve out a subnet for your DMZ, and then create a separate subnet for your backend applications and limit the traffic to that backend subnet, maybe to just a source of things coming from your DMZ subnet, right? So all kinds of different things you can do. But what's really important to keep in mind is, you want to make sure that your infrastructure is set up correctly anytime you stand up a service in Azure. You noticed that before we set up any virtual machine or configured any servers, we had our networking set up first, right? So you're going to want to make sure that's laid out. Also, naming conventions, that's huge. Make sure you have a proper naming convention. Make sure you understand how you're going to do storage, right? If you're going to leverage managed disks in Azure Commercial versus maybe just storage accounts, you're going to want to make sure your storage is set up properly so that it's redundant or it doesn't become a single point of failure for your virtual machines. So all sorts of things like that you have to consider before you start standing up your servers. And an easy way I kind of describe to customers to kind of explain how Azure works, I mean, it's your on-demand data center, right? If you need a resource, you can have it in minutes, but you have to treat it as such, right, as like a data center where you have to make sure the planning is in place and, that the infrastructure is set up correctly before you stand up your service, just to make sure that you're set up for success in the future. So with that said, in the span of 40 minutes, we stood up a public-facing web server, we demoed, network security groups, we covered all kinds of different tidbits when it came to infrastructure. So I guess now I'll go ahead and open it up for questions. Looks like we have one coming in the IM window here. Nope. Okay, so I don't think we have any questions, and we do have a few minutes. So I guess I do want to show one more thing before we end the webcast. So a really cool feature we have as part of the resource manager model in Azure is the automation script. So let's go to that resource group that we created today, this RG Iowa demo. Now let's say you wanted to take an exact replica of this, not replica, but if you wanted to take all these resources and deploy them maybe in a separate subscription all at once, right, to kind of mimic this kind of environment. You can go to automation script here. And here you have all the JSON code or the JSON scripting needed to go ahead and redeploy all the objects within that resource group on the fly. So you could take all of this code here, save it as a JSON file, and then you can go ahead and run a PowerShell script to redeploy all of these resources with one script. And all you'll have to do is enter in the parameters for each resource, like specifying, the name of your virtual network or the name of your storage accounts. And once you've specified those parameters, you can run that PowerShell script, and it'll deploy all these resources with one command in a separate environment, if that's what you want to do. So, and that can be done for anything in Azure. So it makes it really easy to script and deploy entire environments if you need to. Just a pretty cool feature that we have available there. So with that, I guess I'll go ahead and pass it back on to Steve.
All right, great job, Jeffrey. That was an excellent walkthrough and very useful. I put a recording of or the YouTube channel where all the recordings are going to be. So if you know somebody that would be interested in this, please forward them to that channel, and we'll actually ask for one more round of. Are there any other last questions for Jeffrey? Going once, going twice. All right. Well, thank you for attending. Great job again, Jeffrey, and everybody have a great weekend. Sorry.